Today on the iRacing Downshift. I forget to introduce our guest, Dan Garrison, senior software engineer. He's handling all of the dynamic track stuff. Kevin peddles local libations.
Abel Ebenezer, the finest beer in southern New Hampshire.
And Chris thinks he works for NPR.
And you pop your peas.
All that and more. So strap in. Welcome to the iRacing Downshift. I'm your host, Greg West. I'm here with the boys, Chris Leone, Kevin Bobbitt. We got a great show for you today, but first, crisis in the office. Kevin, tell us about it.
It's been a rough week, let me tell you. Last Thursday, you won't believe this, both coffee machines broke.
At the same time.
We think it's a plumbing issue, but neither one works, and the amount of coffee this office consumes on a daily basis, I don't want to say it, but, things might slip and not make the bill. No, just kidding. No, just kidding.
Gosh.
No.
That's not getting edited out. I'm leaving that in there, and it's going to be all your fault.
I'm kidding. Nothing's being pushed because of the lack of coffee, but there's been several staff members that have stepped up. I think Greg brought some coffee in one day, and people are bringing in the boxes of Joe from Dunks, and we're surviving, but it's been a little touch and go, I'd say.
Unofficial iRacing sponsor, Dunks. Big shout out.
I will say I've had a
iRacing
number...
runs on Dunks.
That's true, but I will say a number of people have also come back to my little cubicle in the back corner to pilfer some Red Bull from me.
I'm drinking one right now.
But I think the crisis is almost done. The repairman is due today in the office, and we should be back to normal.
Our long national nightmare is over.
All right, moving on to things that are actually relevant. Let's get on to This Week in iRacing. Peak at Michigan last night. What a show. 3 and 4 wide all night again. Chris, tell us about it.
God, what a finish. I mean, one of the cool things about this package that's come to the eNASCAR Peak Antifreeze iRacing Series this year is it's produced so much close racing. And the finish at Michigan, no exception. The drivers who actually crossed the finish line first, second, and third, we knew that Chris Overland was up there for most of the race, and actually ton of credit to the entire Wood Brothers racing team because Ray Alfalla had his best showing of the year too. But, it was Overland was up there. There was a little bit of contact in the last lap. It took Keegan Leahy out of the running, Jimmy Mullis out of the running. A few drivers really got caught up in that last lap wreck, but and we've seen this in real world racing too. What a dash to the finish. Garrett Lowe, Chris Overland, Blake Reynolds, 1, 2, 3, separated by 38 1,000ths of a second, I think it was.
It was close.
It was real close.
I saw Chris tweeted about the finish. He's like, you know what? Some people are commenting about my driving, and then he posted a video of Dale Earnhardt kind of sideways going for it. He's like, I had a chance to win, I went for it. And I can't blame him. You know what? One lap to go when it's separated by, 300ths of a second, yeah, you go for it. He got a little loose, but it was good racing all night. It sucks for Keegan, but you know what? I guarantee when things cool down afterwards, like, you know what, that was good racing. And what comes around goes around.
It was a great show, and, that's ultimately what everybody wants, right? Obviously the drivers want to win, but we have to have a good show. If it's not a good show, the series doesn't exist, right? So super, super exciting. Great to see Ray Alfalla running well again. He's obviously been a perennial favorite and really strong runner. Not his best year, but it's good to see him running towards the front again.
And a ton of credit to Garrett Lowe, too. Rookie, I believe the 8th different winner this year, but an eNASCAR Ignite Series graduate as well. So, that youth movement, those young drivers moving up, and we've already seen last year's Ignite champion, Zach Novak, win multiple times this year. So a lot of great young drivers in the pipeline, and Garrett Lowe just the latest in a long line of winners.
Speaking of young drivers, Casey Kerwin running up front, but the featured driver camera strikes again, just as he's making a move, and I believe it's his second place. We flip to the featured driver. Next thing you know, he gets doored going down the backstretch.
It's kind of like the commentator's curse, right?
It is. It's like he, doing us a favor and put on some great content, and it never fails to bite.
Well, you guys blame me with the iRacing curse for GRC, so...
Well, you just personally killed GRC.
Yeah, apparently killing GRC was my fault. Sorry, everyone.
Moving on to the World of Outlaws. Woo-woo! At Knoxville. Chris, tell us about it.
7 different winners, 7 races in the Morton Buildings Late Model World Championship. Man, one of the most competitive world championships I think we've ever put on. And there are still so many talented drivers that haven't taken a race win. Kendall Tucker, your points winner, hasn't won yet. Kevin Dedman, top 5 week after week after week, no wins yet. Zach Leonardi, Howard Weaver, first and second in points last year, no wins yet. We've only got 3 races left. At least one of those drivers is going to go winless this year. But Evan C. finally takes the checkered flag. He was in the mix from the beginning of the season, had a couple of, so-so runs, but still making the feature, and that is enough just to keep you in the points championship. And then Evan took down Kendall Tucker. I mean, he was racing Kendall pretty clean and pretty patient for most of the 50-lap feature. There were only a couple of cautions after the race that we had at Kokomo a couple of weeks ago where drivers were just having a real hard time keeping it off one another. Knoxville was much cleaner race, and then Evan on one of the restarts finally found his way around Kendall, and then it was sayonara.
I don't see how these guys are making these passes just time after time. And there's been some contact, but for the most part, it's pretty clean racing. They just slide job after slide job after slide job in a car that I actually cannot make it around the track in. I have tried, and I cannot do it. I mean, I'm not a good driver, but I'm not a horrible driver.
True statement.
But yeah, I never ceases to impress me how good these guys are.
Guys still make mistakes, though, and I mean, we even saw that with Alex Bergeron. Alex is going for both championships that we've awarded with World of Outlaws this year, and he made a mistake on that last restart. Clipped Kendall, ended up getting himself into the wall, and fell entirely out of the top 10 despite running in a podium spot for most of the race. That was a big opportunity for him to make up some points and, try to catch Kendall for the championship, and that job gets a little bit harder now.
Moving on to our special guest this week, Dan Garrison, senior software engineer who handles all of our dynamic environments, sat down with Kevin and I talking all things dynamic track and weather. So without further ado, Mr. Dan Garrison. All right, Kevin and I are excited to have another great guest with us. Dan the Man Garrison, the king of the dirt, the guy that makes your tires do things in the sim with the ground. Am I saying that right, Dan?
That's pretty close.
Yeah?
Dave Kemmer, of course, is the tire guy. I'm the ground guy. We tend to collaborate as such.
That's probably smart.
That's the marketing explanation versus the actual software engineer explanation.
I think we'll get to the actual software
right.
engineer explanation here in a little bit. So let's go back. How did you initially get involved in sim racing, or your interest in being involved with iRacing or whatever?
Yeah.
Driving a car in a fake world.
Well, I'd always been kind of interested in racing as a kid. And then I kind of didn't do much with it until about 15 years ago. My buddy convinced a couple of my other buddies to pool their money together and buy me an Xbox 360, which was kind of a new system at the time, and a copy of Forza 2. He said, "Dude, it's hard. You'll love it." And sure enough, I did. And
With a controller?
I think I started with a controller, but it was almost immediately I got the Microsoft force feedback wheel, which I think was $100.
That was my first wheel, too.
Yeah. I mean, for what it was, whatever. It's an improvement over a controller for sure. But then, I kind of got the bug, and I started looking for better equipment. My buddy bought a setup, a Fanatic or Fanatec, or however the heck you say it.
I think they're synonymous.
He got a whole setup with a wheel and a H shifter and, pedals with a clutch and everything. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty awesome. How much would this cost for me to get into? So next thing you know, I'm buying stuff, and it wasn't until I started kind of perusing the discussion boards for Fanatic that I started seeing mention of other software titles and PC racing, and the one that kept coming up over and over was iRacing. And so I did a little research and liked what I saw. The whole idea that you have a career, whatever, and all these different cars and tracks, and the attention to realism and online racing, and it seemed like a dream come true. So convinced my buddy to build me a PC on the cheap so I could get going into it, and signed up. And that was it. That was my major hobby until I started working here, and it became my major profession.
Weren't you the Lotus 79 guru for a long time? Like, you raced in one of those leagues, right?
Yeah. I mean, the Lotus 79 guys, they run, during... They use official racing. They don't have a league, but they have kind of their own setup or whatever. And I remember wanting to get into that as soon as I saw that car, because it was kind of that era of Formula One that I remembered as a kid being really cool. So about 6 months in, I decided, I'll look a couple weeks ahead in the schedule and pick out the track that they're going to be at, and tried to learn the car. And then the very first session I ran with a bunch of dudes was a qualifying session and got smoked. Like
Those guys can drive. Everybody in that group can drive.
My goodness. I thought I was pushing as hard as I could, and I was like a couple of seconds behind, and I'm like keeping an eye in the mirror, like these guys are going to run me over and hate me. So decided, 6 months is not enough time to learn how to, really drive a car that difficult. So I backed up to, the Skippy, spent...
Time out. People listening, take notes.
Seriously.
Sometimes take a step back.
It made all the difference in the world. I ran the Skippy for a couple of seasons and went to the Star Mazda, did the Lotus 49 for a couple of seasons, and after all that experience, when I finally got back to the Lotus 79, I was finally able to kind of, drive it with some of the
So you were
faster
competitive?
guys. I was competitive.
Oh,
Yeah.
impressive.
I was top 10.
Wow.
So what do you now going back to the Skippy and the Star Mazda? What do you think you picked up from there or developed that made you better in the L79?
Well, the Skippy was a car that is a momentum car, right? I mean, you couldn't rely on the horsepower. And the thing with the 79 was it's also surprisingly a car that you kind of want to carry as much speed into the corner as you can and keep that downforce working. So I kind of got over the point, and step on the gas type of driving and more smooth and carrying speed and, letting the car do its weight transfer thing a little more gradually and all that kind of stuff. Then the Lotus 49 was kind of like a monster horsepower version of that. And you had to learn throttle control, which, again, with the Lotus 79, it's got enough power that if you step on it, you're in trouble, So it was really just kind of fine-tuning the skills you needed to be able to drive the higher-powered cars and the more advanced cars. And the Lotus 79, everything comes at you really fast. So, that was the last little step, was once I started driving the 79 again. It was, okay, it's like everything I've learned, but now I got to be on speed.
That's fair. So you've moved on. You've got a PC. You are an iRacing member in one of the major niche clubs that we have. What transitioned you from being a user to, hey, I can work there?
It was pretty surprising, actually, that I got hired, to be truthful.
Yeah, we wonder how you got hired.
I wonder every day. So, like I said, iRacing was my major hobby. I mean, I was doing it a few hours a night, most nights of the week. And my regular job was becoming less and less desirable. And
what were you doing before? What industry?
I was a programmer. I was a software engineer,
Okay.
but with a big company. And the situation there was getting just kind of slowly worse and worse. And eventually something happened that I just said, that's it. I'm going to have to look around. And I'm also a musician, and I picked two places to start. I figured I had two dream jobs to go for. One was a music software company, music notation, and I have a degree in music theory and a degree in computer science. I'm like, I'm perfect for these guys. And then iRacing had a thing that said, we're looking for guys with sound experience is helpful. I'm like, maybe that'll be my in. I haven't worked in the video game industry before, but whatever. I'll go ahead and apply on the off chance. And then
did you know anybody here, or were you coming in blind?
Coming in blind. So, I remember telling my wife, I think there's about a 50-50 chance I'll hear back from the music guys and about a 2% chance I'll hear back from iRacing. And the opposite happened. Steve got back to me, based on the basis of my cover letter, and said, put together your CV and get back to us. And I never heard back from the music software company. So that was it. And then I came out and interviewed, and my knowledge of the product, of course, was a big plus. My enthusiasm, I'm sure, was a big plus. And I had a number of years, like 15 years of software development under my belt. So
You clearly know racing. I mean, most Monday mornings when we get in, both of us are kind of early guys. getting a cup of coffee, and what do? We talk racing. We talk Formula One. We you know what happened. We did just before we started recording. We were talking about the F1 race. So
Don't worry, that's on B-roll.
so you know, not only do you know how to write software, but you know, racing from my perspective truly is your passion. I can tell when I talk to you every Monday. So
yeah. Formula One is kind of my main thing, but over the years I've followed even like drag racing. As a kid, I loved drag racing. And,
Everybody on the forums say, Dan said drag racing. It's coming out this build, obviously, because he said the words drag racing. It's going to happen. But so, what year? What year were you hired?
2014.
All right. What was the first? You get in here, and they typically just throw something on your desk and say, "This is your problem now."
Yeah.
What was your problem?
Well, that's true, and I kind of wanted to get a little familiar with the code and fix a few bugs here and there, and pretty soon they're like, "Yeah, we need to give you a big project." And the big project was the dynamic track. That was the thing that they gave to me to run with, to learn all the different systems with, and it turned out to be a great idea because you do wind up touching a bunch of different things.
with the end goal of dynamic tracks being what?
The end goal of dynamic tracks being this system that kind of makes the environment more dynamic.
But obviously, it translates into other features that we've added that you've worked on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, initially it was just the asphalt stuff, and that has enabled us, though, the framework we laid with the dynamic track system, the clients sending their changes to the server accumulating them, sending them out. That whole framework gives us the ability to do dirt.
Which is why you have the Tupperware containers on your desk with different types of dirt.
Yes.
Just so we're clear.
I became known as Mr. Dirt or Dr. Dirt or whatever, Steve.
That's right. You featured in several of our videos in your lab coat, right? So those of you listening, you may have watched some of our videos back when we launched Dirt, and there was this, I don't know, professor-looking guy walking around in a lab coat, smelling plants and dirt and all kinds of weird things. That
was just your typical Tuesday, though. All right, so you get this project, and you're handed this dynamic environment project. What's your first move to get up to speed?
Well, the first thing we had to do was try to figure out, what are we trying to accomplish here? And the big thing that the biggest thing we decided we had to do was make sure that, it was fair for everyone, that we didn't have, you and Kevin, myself, all in a race, and we're racing on different tracks. We had to make it...
So it's not just making the track surface change, but we've got to store that data so that it changes the same way for everybody in that race session.
Right. I mean, the competition in iRacing has to be fair. We go to extreme lengths to make sure of that. And we have to ensure that everybody's getting the same track and, all that kind of stuff. So it has to be robust, and everybody has to be racing on the same surface. And so that was one of the primary design considerations was, okay, we have to make sure everybody's racing the same track at the same time.
And I think that's something that people don't realize. We come up with this concept where we're going to make dynamic track and, making all these changes that affect the racing. That's like the sexy part of it. But you got to build the infrastructure first that even makes it possible. And I think that's some of the things that people don't really realize, and they wonder why things take a while. But it's having that infrastructure that you take for granted to make it even and fair for every single person, whether you're in the U.S., whether you're racing in somebody in Australia, whether you're racing in somebody in Europe. It's 78 degrees and the track temperature is 95 degrees and the wind's blowing from the northeast at 2 miles an hour. It all has to be the same for everybody. And I'm assuming there's more to it than just telling it what to do.
Yeah, there was a lot of times when Dave and I were talking about this project and getting it started, where we'd look at each other and he would say, this would be a lot simpler if this wasn't a multiplayer game, if this was just like one guy against a bunch of AI cars or something, So, yeah, like I said, the dynamic track project was a great introduction to the code base for me because I had to learn what's going on the client. I had to learn enough about the server to be able to make the two talk to each other. And the communication system between client and server, I had to add to that to, make the data from the client go to the server, have it accumulated, send out the track state to all the clients. And of course, there was some, how do we set this up so that it works well for the physics, so that they can read the data, quickly and get accurate data, and also for the graphics. What sort of format can we put this data in so that we can quickly give it to the renderer and have it show the rubber and the marbles and dust, etc. So that was, and we're adding this new system, and of course, if you had infinite resources, like you weren't worried about memory or time, you could make just the greatest system anybody ever saw, but you have to make decisions about, okay, what are we willing to compromise in order to make the system workable, without killing everybody's computer, or without dragging the server down, or flooding the network with a bunch of new data that we've never sent before and just bringing everything else to a halt. So, in the end, of course, I think we made the right decisions, because we were able to plug in dirt with not a whole lot of changes to the dynamic track, other than, okay, now we need to kind of deal with a changing dirt surface. And but for the most part, it was just a matter of, okay, now we're going to extend it. We're going to extend what we already have. We didn't have to scrap a whole bunch of stuff. It was just, okay, now we're going to start worrying about, there's this much dirt and there's this much loose dirt sitting on top, and the water content is this, and all that kind of stuff.
Let's go into that a little bit. So you were one of the main cogs in the machine that built dirt, which has become a huge part of iRacing. One of the key pillars. How does our dynamic model that you helped create allow us to do dirt in such a realistic way?
Well, the dynamic track is able to respond to what cars are actually doing on the track. So there's not a canned response that's built into the dynamic track. It keeps track of what's going on in thousands or tens of thousands, depending on the size of the track. It might even be 500,000 places on the track that we keep these numbers of how much dirt is here, how much dust or rubber, or what is the temperature here. And so we don't have a built-in response based on cars, just driving laps. We're going to change the track this way, or we're going to change the track that way. It's actually the physics, the tire interacting with the track, that then figures out what does that do to the track, and then those changes are sent up to the server. So our dirt model is based on what people are actually doing. If cars leave a part of the track alone, it's going to stay pretty much the same. A little water might evaporate off. You might throw a little loose dirt up there, but if nobody's driving on a certain part of the track, it's not going to change just because people are turning hundreds of laps. Whereas if they are just wearing in a certain groove, it's going to wear out where they're driving.
All right, so we've talked about how dirt's come about and what's gone into it, and how individual cars going around it are making changes to that specific location. How is this going to allow us to move forward? What opportunities does this open up for iRacing to develop further?
Well, of course, once you've got the framework in place, and just like we did with dirt, when we added the components to be able to track dirt and water content, we can also track water, for example, which then leads us right into rain. So, I think everybody knows we're kind of working on rain.
They do now.
Confirmed.
It's going to be a big project. I think it's not as simple as just let's throw a little water down and see what happens.
Because we're not going to fake it. We're going to make it as realistic as possible, where certain amounts of rain are going to have everything from effect for water runoff, which we have the ability to track because we have laser scans, so we know where it's going to go, to how it's going to affect the temperature, not just on the surface, though, how the ground holds temperature based off the conditions. Am I right?
Yeah, thinking about rain kind of led me to revisit the temperature model, the track temperature. And, the current one on members does a lot of things. It takes into account the albedo of the surface, how directly is the sun shining.
Hold up.
Did you say libido?
I think you need to define that word.
Yeah.
Albedo. Albedo is the property of a substance that describes whether it reflects solar energy or absorbs solar energy.
I knew that. I just wanted the listeners to understand.
Right. So concrete, which is white, has a high albedo. it tends to reflect stuff, whereas like asphalt, which is dark, tends to absorb more of the solar energy.
The more you know.
Perfect.
There you go. So the things that affect the temperature today are things like the albedo, how direct the sun is in the sky, how well the track is angled towards the sun, of course shadows, clouds. Once we got the moving sun, moving sky, then shadows would move, clouds could block the sun, all that stuff. And of course cars, tires and engines heat up the track where they're going. All that's there. The thing that made me kind of step back and say, well, okay, is this going to be adequate for rain, was the thought, what happens if, the sun's beating down on the track and then it starts raining and it's a short little shower. What'll happen in the current model is, the water will cool the track down, it'll evaporate off, but then that heat is pretty much gone. Whereas in real life, if the sun's been beaten down, you've got a bunch of energy stored under the track. And in the current model, that's pretty much lost. The current model,
you see that in the real world, like a summer storm. It's 110 degrees out in New England, and then a storm comes through, rains for 20 minutes, dumps water for 20 minutes. 15 minutes later, the road's dry. Your lawn might not be, but that's because the road was so hot, right? I mean, it's contributing to that drying. The sun's back out. So, we're looking at things on that level of detail. And from my perspective, the driving in the rain, the changing amount of grip is what's interesting. If you watch a Formula One race, to bring it back to that, what's interesting is not when it's raining. It's like, okay, looks like it's stopping raining. Now what do we do? Like, that's the real challenge for me. And it sounds like we're factoring all that in.
Yeah. Well, the goal of the model is to actually keep track of what's going on underneath so that there is a sense of history. So if in the morning the track is 100 degrees and a cloud comes by, it'll cool off pretty quickly. And in the afternoon,
because only the surface is really 100 degrees,
just started
maybe
to warming
the
up.
First centimeter or two.
Yep.
Versus if it's 100 degrees at 3 p.m., now it might be 100 degrees or close to 100 degrees a foot down or however deep it is.
Right. Exactly. And if a cloud comes by in that afternoon and the surface cools, it shouldn't cool as quickly at 3
And same
p.m.
with rain. The water's going to cool what it's touching,
Exactly.
and then slowly the rest of it. But if it only rains for 10 minutes, it's not really cooling the entire piece of asphalt.
Right. And the ground underneath. Exactly.
Right.
Yep. That's it. That's the idea exactly, is that the new model will take care of all those behaviors that you expect by just modeling what's actually going on, which is kind of the way we try to do things, to basically say, well, let's think about what's really happening here instead of thinking about, okay, here's the desired effect. How do we get that? I mean, that's
Right, because it would be easy to just code in, let's make the asphalt less grippy, right?
Right.
We could change that without doing a whole lot of work, right?
Right.
And then flip a switch and make it grippy again when it dries. But that's not how it works in the real world. And
Right.
that's not
And
how we do things here at iRacing.
That's not at all how we do things here. We do the opposite.
Which I think our members appreciate. There may be some frustrations with how long it takes sometimes, but if this stuff was easy, everybody would do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you model it correctly from the get-go, then the right behaviors just fall out, including things that you didn't anticipate. If you try to build just an empirical model that is going to deal with all the variables and you try to come up with some magic formulas and stuff, then it might work in some cases, but as soon as you move outside that box, it all falls apart.
So what are you most excited about when all this comes together and what you're working on right now? What really gets you going?
Well, I do want to see rain. I want to see, the changing conditions, as Kevin was talking about. I mean, that's really, driving in the rain is a challenge, but to be competitive with other people who are trying to beat you, you need to be able to kind of anticipate what's going to happen. Where is that switchover point? So we do need to make a lot of systems better in order to handle rain, and we need to extend what we've got. We need to have multiple tire compounds. We need to have a weather system that's a little bit more robust, a little bit deals with the fact that we have a moving sun and moving sky and all that stuff. I mean, a lot of these systems are still kind of grounded in the kind of the old static sim world, and we're having to kind of move things forward to kind of catch up. Now that the sun's moving and clouds are moving, it doesn't really make sense for the temperature to just kind of remain fixed or move a degree or two over a 24-hour period.
What about currently now? Are you driving much in the sim, other than work?
No, unfortunately.
That seems to be the way it goes.
It is.
People get their dream job here at iRacing, and they spend so much time driving and testing, and sometimes you need a separation, right?
I mean, that's part of it. But it's also, iRacing was the escape for me. I would even take a long lunch, when I was working the job I hated, and would hop into a race or something or a practice session and work on some stuff. And now that I'm here, it doesn't have quite the appeal. Although I have at times jumped into some races, but if you're not doing it all the time, you lose your ability to drive with other people competitively, and
especially
safely.
a difficult car like the 79.
Yeah, I don't even attempt that.
But if you did have the time, what would you race? The 79 again, or would you one of the newer cars that we've built? Because you've been here for 5 years, I think. We've added a lot of content since then.
Yeah, I'd get the Formula Renault a try because I did really enjoy, the Star Mazda. So I do like the open wheel cars more than others, but and that the Nissan, kind of the old school, crazy power Nissan,
Way too much horsepower and
Yeah.
and not a lot of aids
Aero
to help
grip.
you get around. It's
No.
just,
that car is insane. But the times that I've tried it and actually hooked it up right, it was a blast to drive. So something like that. I mean, that would be my ideal, would be able to drive some monster car like that again.
So what do you do outside of iRacing now? Because you were a huge a huge active member, but now it consumes 40 or 50 hours a week of your life.
Yeah.
So what are you doing outside to fill that void?
Well, I mean, I spend a lot of my time with my son, of course. I'm married. We have a 10-year-old, and he is
takes a little bit of time, huh?
Takes a little, yeah. It takes an incredible amount of time. All of you out there who are thinking about possibly starting a family, just be prepared.
Why are you looking over here at me, Dan?
I know something that you do outside of, quote, work. You walk into my office often, pick up a marker
erase.
from my dry erase, and write math equations on my wall. And I'm not sure if you do it to torture me or what, but you seem to enjoy the math equations, and me not so much.
Yeah, that's true. I do. I like learning new things as far as math and watching videos on the number file channel. And
see, me on the other hand,
wait,
I do
that's a
math
thing?
when I need
That's
to
a
do
thing.
math. If I have a problem I need to solve, I do the math. You, on the other hand, are fascinated just by the equation.
yeah, well,
There is no question. You just want
No.
to do the equation.
math is its own system. It's a world in and of itself. And you can sometimes discover kind of unexpected and interesting things just by working within mathematics. It's one of the things I try to tell my son Danny is, most subjects you have to kind of read or study. Math is one of these things you can kind of figure things out on your own. And
Please
see how
excuse
things-
my dear Aunt Sally. All right, off the top of your head, quadratic equation, go.
The quadratic, you mean like the formula, the solution of a quadratic? It's,
He doesn't know. He just remembers that word from math 25
Yeah, I don't
years
even
ago.
know.
He doesn't even know
I
what
know
it
it's
means.
underneath the square root.
I think it's
or
b squared minus the square root of 4ac over 2a, I think.
I'm not sure how
I actually think
we are
that's
actually
right.
friends here, Dan, because it seems like we have so little in common. Yet I enjoy having our conversations. How about your collection of Blip Shift shirts? What's your favorite?
Oh, for sure my favorite is the cranky shirt.
That's what I would have guessed.
Yeah, because I wear that every time it's clean. I wear that shirt.
And
sometimes when it's not. Too easy.
I'll just set up the. I'll throw little softballs right down the middle. You guys can knock them out.
All right, well, Dan, thanks a lot for giving us your time. I know every time I've walked back there today, you have been knee-deep in a huge monitor of code that I can't even begin to understand. But thanks a lot for making time with us. It's been great.
You're welcome.
And I'm sure we'll ask you on here again soon whenever there's raindrops falling from the sky, and you can tell us why and how and maybe when.
Maybe when.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right,
Thanks, Dan.
thanks.
Always great having another iRacing employee join us on the podcast. Dan delivers again. Really cool hearing about what's coming up on dynamic track and with weather. Just to clarify, no, it is not going to be in the Season 4 build. It's something we are working on, but let's just squash that forum thread now. Moving on to the real world recap. This is brought to you by the guys over at SimLab. Richard and the boys, they're sponsoring the SimLab Production Card Challenge, where they're giving away one of their P1X sim racing chassis, valued at about $700. One lucky winner will, from Season 3 and Season 4, will walk away with one. To join the raffle, all you got to do is race. So every time you race, you get an entry. Maybe you'll get drawn. We'll see. Also, Kevin,
if you happen to be joining us over in Germany at the Sim Racing Expo later this month, you'll be able to test drive a SimLab chassis. We're going to have a couple.
Three.
We'll have 3 of them in our booth, and we'll be featuring some Fanatec equipment on top. So that'll be really cool. You can check it out and drive it for yourself. See if you want to pick up one.
direct drive wheels,
Awesome.
V3 upgraded pedals,
Should be good.
sim racing chassis, SimLab racing chassis.
I wonder if we'll have anything new and special we can show.
I wonder if we could maybe show something that...
I don't know. We'll have to think about it.
I've said too much. Let's start off Formula One at the Hungarian Grand Prix. What a race. Lewis Hamilton had to do a little bit of driving this week.
Yeah, despite the pundits thinking he was ready to retire after his poor showing the week before, I think Lewis showed the world he can still drive. He had some strategy worked out. He got some fresh tires at the end of the race, and then he hunted that Red Bull car down.
Yeah, and that Red Bull car has not exactly been slow this season. But Chris, you had an interesting take on this.
No doubt. I mean, every time we get into the NFL season, if you watch those NFL recaps, there's always Overreaction Monday. And what everybody said after the German Grand Prix about Lewis having one bad race was the king of all Overreaction Monday takes. I mean, the guy's still driving a Mercedes. The guy's still got a high double-digit points lead. No, Lewis Hamilton is not done. He's going to set plenty more records. By the time he finishes his career, frankly, he may be the winningest driver in F1 history at this rate.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's Boston sports radio is notorious for it. Tom Brady only throws 4 touchdowns, and they say, "Oh my God, he should retire. He shouldn't be playing." And the fact is, he's still the GOAT. And Lewis, is he the greatest? I don't know, but he's certainly up there in the conversation, and he's got a few more seasons to go, I think.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how many W's he puts up the rest of the season. He had an interview yesterday. He's talking about over the summer break, he's going to focus on recovering and rehabbing and being the best that he can be.
Hanging out on his yacht, probably.
Yeah, life sucks.
That's what I do when I need to take a
He
day
sold
off.
his red G5 or whatever, so I don't know how he's doing it. But let's move on to NASCAR. They're also returning right this week. They're up at Watkins, Glen, and man, there was some more bumping and banging. Kevin, one heck of a race.
I love Watkins Glen in any series, and NASCAR. Some of my favorite races in NASCAR have been there. There was that one a few years ago when there was oil all over the track, and it made one of the most exciting races I've ever seen. This one was fantastic as well. I love when sheet metal gets bent and people are fighting and turning each other.
Crashing Kyle Busch.
I may have cheered out loud when that happened.
I may have bought a Bubba Wallace shirt.
Gee, Kyle Busch doesn't seem to have many friends, does he? But you need a black hat in
Hey,
racing
he's good
like
for the
that.
sport. Fantastic.
Exactly.
And the guy can drive.
My theory is that Kyle Busch is Dale Earnhardt without the fan base. I mean, frankly, I don't understand why all the Earnhardt haters don't like Kyle Busch, because he drives like your hero does,
Right.
but has, I don't know, about 100 more NASCAR National Series wins. I'm just saying.
I think that's a sore subject with NASCAR fans, though, because to find National Series wins versus Richard Petty and Dale Earnhardt doing it on Sundays the hard way. Yeah, I'm not. Kyle can wheel, but he's also kind of a jerk, and I was really happy to see Bubba Wallace say, I'm not taking this. You did it once. You're not doing it again. They beat the crap out of each other going down into turn 1, and I think that was a almost arrogance on Kyle not thinking he was going to get turned. I mean, he just gave him the quarter panel. What do you think was going to happen? I'd love to hear the in-car radio right there.
Is Bubba just giving Kyle Richard Petty's revenge for that 201st win?
I have no context for that.
Sure.
43 car, that's all I'm saying. 43 car.
I got nothing.
Hey, speaking of the 43 car, though, I heard that they're going to be running a Adam Petty throwback scheme as a tribute coming up, which is kind of cool.
God, that is one of the most heartwarming schemes I think we've ever seen. It's weird to see a Petty 43 that doesn't have the Petty blue on it, but considering that it's Adam's colors and that they've got the Victory Junction camp on it and that camp was really Adam's idea, that's a really special scheme. It's been awesome to see the Victory Junction colors in the 43 so much this year.
Moving on, let's talk about more beating and banging. IMSA at Road America. Kevin, you were watching this one live. What is a block? And at what point do you call it?
What is a block? That's a tough one. It was exciting. Spoiler alert, Mazda won again. But the last lap was pretty exciting. And what is it, going into turn 5? Mazda runs a little wide, then they run a little wide the other way, then they run back across the track. There's carbon fiber flying across the track. If I was a steward, I think I'd call that a block and somebody'd get a penalty. But I'm not a steward. I'm just a fan.
So Harry Tinknell comes out of turn 5, runs wide, cuts back across the
that seems
the
legit.
nose.
You get one move. You can attempt to hold your position. I'm fine with that.
Then swerves all the way back across from the left to the right again, and then dives into turn 6, cutting the nose off.
The argument's probably that you made your one move to the left, and then you're sort of kind of allowed to move back on line to make the corner. It was pretty aggressive moving back on line.
So here's the question. We agree it's a block. We agree it was a second block, but it's the last lap of the race, battling for the lead. What official throws that black flag?
That's a tough call. IMSA and NASCAR, nobody wants to change the outcome of the race on the last lap. But it's happened before. It's happened in the Rolex 24. It's happened in Sebring, so it's not unprecedented. But it's a tough call. I don't want to be the guy making that call.
You see, I don't want to see a steward making that move. I want to see the two guys get out on pit road and have words. And let's do it like late 80s NASCAR style where the crews get into it a little bit and, they have words. And it takes care of itself right there because then, there's going to be revenge later on. But I don't want to see a steward throw a black flag.
If the car that got blocked, the Acura, wasn't the championship leading car, there may have been a different reaction on track, right? He's got too much to lose to try to move that Mazda anymore. Right?
He may have Bubba Wallace'd him.
Just saying. Just saying.
And you can't. It's difficult in a situation like that because you set a precedent for every other last lap, subsequently. No matter what you do, whether you do anything or don't do anything. I mean, I remember the Rolex 24, Kevin, that you were talking about, where we had
Of course you remember.
Well,
the 1978 Rolex 24.
No, I was kind of working a little bit with Townsend Bell at the time, and he was one of the cars involved there, and it was under the avoidable contact rules that they made that penalty. And people were up in arms because there was actually no contact. But if you read the IMSA rule book at the time, the avoidable contact rule was just a poorly named rule. It didn't actually say anything about contact in the rule. That type of driving would merit a penalty. And then they reversed it, and then you had more confusion about the rule book. So it's tough no matter what you do.
I think that on the last lap, it's always more difficult. We've seen things in NASCAR in the Truck Series, right, at Mosport, right? Cars getting turned in the last corner of the last lap, whether there's a penalty or not.
And go.
Right. I mean, not the same situation, but still something that, somebody's got to make a call on, and it's really tough to do. So
I have a feeling we can apply this to iRacing, Greg.
Yeah, I was like, this is a great segue into this week's NIMS tips. Every week, Chief Steward Nim Cross gives us a kind of a quick overview of the trends that he's seeing when people protest or get mad or just, tell us what they think of us. And this one is when or when not to submit a protest. Nim says protests are supposed to be used for terms of service violations and intentional, that's underlined, acts of wrecking. He said if somebody doesn't intentionally wreck you, but it's simply a racing incident, guys, pretty much everybody on the service is not a professional race car driver. We can't hold people to higher standards than their capabilities. But if you do feel like that the move was malicious and they intentionally took you out, send a video in that shows the initial incident and the act of retaliation, because there's always two sides to a story, as long with a couple of sentences saying what happened to give us some context. We'll take a look. We'll review it. Pro tip, if you want the penalty to go the way you want it to go, maybe don't tell us how much we stink at our jobs. We typically, that doesn't garner any favor. But we do the best we can. Nim does a really good job. He also notes that if you do make a mistake and take someone out, apologize. Take ownership of it. Kindness goes a long way to de-escalate a situation, and that right there keeps all cars on track later on. So pretty solid tip. It's one of those things you feel like goes without saying, and then you go watch a rookie street stock race, and you realize it needs to be said.
Well, I think we've said it before in the tip section here that the vast majority of incidents that happen on iRacing are not intentional. They may be, they're certainly frustrating for the person that gets the short end of the stick. It's a mistake. They're probably avoidable. Almost everything is, but that doesn't mean the person took you out on purpose, right? So there's a big difference there.
Moving on to the week ahead in iRacing, we got the Knoxville special event. Chris, tell us about it.
Yeah, the Knoxville Sprint Car Showdown. The 410 Sprint Cars headed to Knoxville Raceway. As we always do with every discipline of racing that we have special events that mimic some of the most exciting and most important races in the real world, and Knoxville's certainly no exception. That'll be this week's format, so be sure to get in those 410 Sprint Cars and go for glory.
And then we also have Ignite going to Richmond.
Ignite, for the first time, Ignite moves from the Legends cars to the Modifieds. 50 of the best teenage drivers between 13 and 16 years old. This is a huge youth initiative by eNASCAR and iRacing to find talented young drivers. We mentioned earlier in the show, Garrett Lowe and Zach Novak both came out of that series. Rajah Caruth, now a Drive for Diversity driver with NASCAR, came out of Ignite. We've got a few other guys, Parker Retzlaff, who is now running K&N East. These young drivers really take this opportunity and try to make the most of it. We got 5 playoff races, 4 before the finale at Martinsville, which will narrow that 50 driver field down to 30, and the winner gets a $10,000 racing scholarship. Not too bad.
I'm pretty excited for this part because we moved from the Legends car into the Tour Modified, and now we've got a lot more horsepower, bigger, wider car, open wheel, and to see how these kids transition to that. These are good races, so I'm excited to see how that goes.
To be fast in both those cars, you've got to be a solid driver.
We've also got the VRS 4 Hours of Sebring coming up. Chris, tell us about how Josh Rogers is going to make more money.
Well, Josh Rogers is going for what I think we would all have considered before the season to be impossible, and that's a perfect season in VRS. Endurance racing, that's always tough because you've also got to rely on another driver teamed up with you to be able to, win all those races. But Josh is a perfect 4 for 4 right now. He's got a 100-point lead in the championship, so he's got a full race. He could skip one if he wanted to and at least be tied for the championship lead. I mean, Josh Rogers has just been the class of the field in anything sports car that he's done this year, between the Porsche Esports Super Cup and this and VRS. And so it's going to be interesting to see if, with 2 more races left in the VRS season, both of them in August, if he can, take that sweep.
And Chris, we've also got World of Outlaws going to Williams Grove, a little bit different than Kokomo.
Yeah, 3 races left in the World of Outlaws Morton Buildings Late Model World Championship. All 3 tracks totally different from one another. Williams Grove, only appearance on the schedule this season, so it's going to be interesting to see how these guys, adapt and react to that. Again, like we talked about earlier, 7 different winners in 7 races. We still do not have a repeat winner, and our points leader still hasn't won, and our defending champion still hasn't won. So could Williams Grove be the week?
You'll find out. And finally today, Kevin and I did the Throw and Go Challenge again. Kevin, tell him about it.
Well, we got lucky and actually got a car that can turn left and right this time. So we had the original Indy car from the 2011 model that we have. Not the original Indy car, but our original
our
Indy
OG.
car. Right, which is a fun car to drive. We run baseline and with no practice. So
no downforce, apparently.
No downforce. The gearing was not to my liking. It was a challenge, I took the cautious approach and tried not to throw it off and succeeded in running a clean lap, which was pretty exciting. Anytime you can do that at the ring, you're doing okay. I could see that Greg was slightly ahead of me. We tried to start at the same time. We sit next to each other and race. He's got his VR headset on, so he doesn't really know where I am, but I can peer over and see where he's doing. He was a little bit ahead of me, but it turns out, I think on turn 2, which is, obviously very early in the lap, Greg dropped a wheel or something and had an incident. So that added a 10-second penalty.
Yeah, so that's right. Turn 2, I expected some downforce under braking. Wasn't there. Put a wheel off, got a 1X, and then I was clean the rest of the lap. Ended up running a 6:17. No, you were a 6:17. I was 6:11. You were 6:17.
Yeah, I was about 6 seconds slower, but there's a 10-second penalty per
And so
incident point.
Kevin wins it because I get bumped to a 6:21 to a 6:17 on the ring. That was our closest one, though. It was a good battle. I knew I was ahead of you because you turn the sound up so high. I can hear when you're on the straights and when you're in the heavy S's section. So I tried to play it up as if I was further ahead than you, knowing I had a 1X, thinking you'd make a mistake, and then you didn't.
You guys know my first ever experience with iRacing was actually with that model Dallara.
Is that right?
It was at a simulator at Watkins, Glen about 10 years ago for an IndyCar race. And it was cool because they had the cockpit and you actually sat in it and, started driving. And I was doing really well. And then the person who was administering the simulator told me I was doing well. And so then I bend at the very next corner.
That typically happens when you get overconfident. I'm quite
I wish
the expert.
IndyCar would go back to Watkins Glen. That was a great race.
That would be really
Have I
cool.
mentioned I love Watkins Glen?
I think we've gotten the hint. So, well, thanks a lot for joining us, guys, for another episode of the iRacing Downshift. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else podcasts are found. If there's a place you want it and we don't have it, tell us about it, and Chris will find it.
Sure will. Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Take it easy.